My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened Here Recently. Jason, I wanted to talk a bit about a game at Gauntlet Con that I had of Funnel World in Dungeon World.
Funnel World. Awesome. We should mention real quickly that about Gauntlet Con, because I don't think we've really talked about it on this show yet. Earlier this year in, I want to say it was like October 20th through 22nd, we did Gauntlet Con, which was an online gaming convention. We had nearly 100 game sessions over the course of those 3 days. Tons of guests, great participation. And it sounds like you ran Funnel World.
I did. Among other games that I played, I got to play Funnel World and run it, which I was really happy with how it went. And there were a few things that I wanted to talk about that I think help achieve the aims that I had for that funnel. So the basic setup of the funnel was all the player characters were going to be members of this village, and the village was going to be having a problem with some kind of festival spirit, and they had done something to piss it off, and they're having to deal with the ramifications of that. So I wanted it to be a little bit more serious as opposed to just comic, which Funnel World can stray into the comic.
It definitely can. On my other show, Fear of a Black Dragon, Tom and I talked about this, like the tendency of funnels to go comic or gonzo, right? And like how to avoid those tendencies. So yeah, this is I'll be interested to hear how you avoided that.
So part of how I handled this, part of how I made it a little bit more real or less silly was like just addressing it up front, having that tone conversation. We've talked about that before, I expect that this could get a little silly. I don't have a problem with like having the occasional silliness, but let's try and play it a little more straight. Is everyone on board with that? Like that kind of discussion. And then instead of what the Funnel World booklet would have you do to give your characters relationships and bonds, I did something else instead.
Well, so what does Funnel World actually have you do there? I can't recall.
Well, so like many other things that it has you do for your characters, like rolling, it has you roll on a table. Like it'll have you roll on a table for just about everything, for your little like personality quirks and descriptors, and also for bonds. So like it'll say, I blame so-and-so for blank. And then you roll another subset for what the blank is, like losing that thing or getting me in trouble or my loss of faith or someone's death. And that's all well and good if you're playing like one character and everyone's trying to keep track of just your one character. It's quite a bit more difficult to keep track of all that.
With like 12 or 15 characters,
yeah,
right?
With all the characters. Yeah. And so I think they would probably just get ignored. Maybe mentioned once. Instead, I opened up another game book that I had lying nearby, the Fiasco Playbook, and I looked at the relationships that they had listed and picked some of the ones that I thought would be good so that characters could be tied to other characters with a relationship that was more simple than this bond. So I had son or daughter of and father, like that was one relationship, or dating, or married to, or rivals with, or friends with, or works with. So after my players had kind of done all of their other random rolling and generated, they looked at who they had, because everyone's got professions now, and they looked at one other thing that I had them do, which was say whether their character was old, young, or just like in their middle years, and use that to determine, okay, which relationships make sense here. And in particular, for some of it helped me set some more serious scenes with different relationships that would make sense, like at a harvest festival. Like I had the dating couple like wander off at one point, before like this harvest spirit struck. And in fact, they were the first to be struck by him. And so initially, like, one of the lovers was killed and the other one like escaped and told the rest of the village about it. And having that kind of setup just helped lead to a more serious overall adventure. And then after several of the villagers had been killed, I started to ask, what are you doing with all of these dead villagers? Are you leaving them where they fell? Because you're in your village, Are you going to bury them? Are you going to have a ceremony now? Or what are you going to do? And that was about 3/4 of the way through the adventure. And it ended up a bunch of them had been killed in and around this one house that was like the governor's or the mayor of the town's house. And they put everyone in there in like respectful positions and then like burned it like a mass cremation. And like several of the characters said a few words, and it was a heavy scene, especially for a funnel world.
No, that's awesome. I mean, so it sounds like, going back to the sort of relationship mapping thing that you did, it sounds like what you did was by creating simpler relationships between all these characters, you were actually able to get more mileage out of the relationships because there was less minutia to keep track of. Is that fair?
Yes.
It's an interesting idea. Huh. No, I like it. It's good.
It worked really, really well. In particular, because like it tied into other things that the players might not have kept close track of, like their professions otherwise, because we had, who did we have working together? I think we had the miner was working with the blacksmith, and that just made a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah. Because one has the ore and the other, smelts it or whatever. Right.
Right. So when they were deciding, who am I going to trust and who am I going to go with when I split up the group? Because I didn't keep all these people together. I kind of had several avenues that the mystery and danger was developing. So several people went here, several people went there. And then some more people, were like, no, I don't want any part of this. And they had to deal with what was going on just in the village. And so it really helped with defining who would have gone where, just in the players' minds. I was really happy with how the session went.
No, it's super cool. One thing that sticks out to me as you're describing this to me is, so normally a funnel, when we think of a funnel adventure, we think of like a per se dungeon. I mean, it is a physical space that the characters are all moving through a la a funnel, and fewer of them are coming out on the other side, right? I think it's interesting that it doesn't sound like you did that. Like, your funnel was more of like a mystery. It was like more of an open space kind of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it was really, there was a per se dungeon. None of them got to it. They all got sidetracked and messing around in the village, but it it worked. It still did what it was supposed to do.
You were still killing them off though, right? Like one by one or however.
Yeah, they were still having to deal with. There was a single villager that first one that got killed basically got brought back, and he was the one who was picking them off one by one, essentially. Them and their.
You were almost playing the final girl, right?
In a sense, I mean, it kind of plays like that, but the characters have a lot more agency, I guess. Like, they don't have to die in a scene. Different stuff can happen.
Yeah, exactly.
All the Dungeon World rules still apply.
I mean, just in tone, I guess, it kind of sounds like a little bit like a horror movie. Funnel girl.
Funnel girl.
No, it sounds super cool. This was just a one shot, I guess, at the con, like one.
Yeah,
session.
it was a one shot.
I'm super interested in the idea of funnels, and I agree with you. There is a tendency for them to go a little like comic and gonzo. I would point everybody to that episode of Fear of a Black Dragon where Tom and I talk for quite a bit about like ways you can avoid that. We had not considered this idea of like the sort of like proactive like relationship mapping that you did to kind of set a more realistic sort of framework for the game or whatever, which I think is a great idea. But I recommend everybody go listen to that episode. It's the Sailors of the Starless Sea one, which is a very famous Dungeon Crawl Classics funnel adventure. Lots of good discussions along the lines of some of the stuff you talked about. Like, for example, when the characters die, like, show us what that means, like either through funeral rites or, that kind of thing. So,
yeah. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Should I Be on the Lookout For? Listeners, today I wanted to recall to your attention Swordbreaker zine, which Logan Howard has been putting together for some time now. We mentioned it a number of episodes ago, but I wanted to bring it back up because it has undergone a dramatic change in this latest issue number 5.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing. I have not had a chance to look at it. Full disclosure, I haven't seen it yet, but everything I've heard is like, oh wow, it's like a whole new Swordbreaker. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I'll say that with an asterisk. I think that the content of Swordbreaker has always been really solid content, but the production value of it was what was not always there in the earlier editions. And now Logan has brought Jesse Ross in to help with art and layout, and it's outstanding. It looks so good.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. Jesse actually works on Codex. His illustrations have been featured in the last 3 issues of Codex, maybe 3 or 4. He did that really terrific illustration for that story game, The Big H, of the Superman figure going downwards, right? To, flying downwards to sort of. Well, anyway, I'm totally tangenting here, but go check out Codex Decay. It's free right now, listeners, on the website, so you can go see what I'm talking about. But Jesse's art is fabulous.
So, issue number 5 of Swordbreaker is called The Folded Lands, and it's very much in a similar vein to a sci-fi fantasy, as opposed to just straight up swords and sorcery fantasy. So when I read through it, he has an appendix in, and he doesn't have Fallout on the appendix in, but it really reminded me of a Fallout kind of scenario where, there was a world and then the world was destroyed and people don't really know what they're using things for. Also kind of reminds me of Dragon Riders of Pern in that way, or
Numenera for a role-playing game reference, right?
Yeah. But it's really, really good. The art's fantastic, layout's head and shoulders above where it was. And some of this content I want to talk about, though. It's really interesting to me. So Logan has done a thing where he wants there to be, in addition to the standard races, he has more advanced kind of races that the players could decide to adopt. And he calls them character types instead of races.
So where you would normally choose dwarf, elf, or halfling or whatever on your character sheet.
Right. Normally you would do something like that, and instead you could choose a gatorkin, where you are akin to some kind of mutant alligator thing. But it gives you different character type abilities, like the gatorkin gets an alternative attack, bite, which has the tags close and messy. So should you choose to do so, you could attack like that. You also get burst of speed. So when you sleep enough to be well rested, gain 1 burst. You may trade a burst at any time to do the following: rush a nearby enemy and do your damage, catch up to something that would otherwise outpace you, or emerge from water in a terrifying way.
Well, so back up. So you would choose the Gatorkin character type for on your playbook or whatever. You would adopt that on your as far as your playbook goes, and then you get those little things as moves. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're akin to your racial ability.
Your racial move. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
But it's more advanced in that that's a bit more of a step. But also, the Gatorkin has and these other alternative races have additional things that happen for specific playbooks. Should you choose to do them. The thief gets, add this option to the list of things you can use a burst from. Rush a nearby enemy and take something from them. So now you could essentially pickpocket somebody really quickly.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. Okay.
Or for the fighter, the move is bend bars, lift gates, and sink boats.
Oh, nice. That's good. Yeah, I like that.
But he has several of these that are part of this. The Gatorkin was just one of them. I think it's a really neat idea. A little homebrew hacking / making your characters more interesting and relevant to the setting.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I mean, that is one of the spaces that, when we often talk about Dungeon World as basically just doing D&D, right? There are many aspects of the Dungeon World rule set that people have a problem with because it seems like it's only that way because that's the way D&D was, right? And the races are one of those big things, right? Kind of like alignment, like we talked about a few episodes ago. Races are very similar. Like the reason why you can choose from those races and only those races is because that is the typical D&D experience is you're going to be playing a dwarf, an elf, an elf, a halfling, a human, whatever. And so I like that, when you're going to take your game into a different setting, you're thinking actively about that, right? You're pushing back against those tropes or whatever. So it's cool.
Yeah. Aside from that, like other content that I liked, he has some random generator tables. There's a mutants one or mutants and monstrosities that gets you bizarre creatures that can inhabit your landscape that are something that the players might have to deal with or just observe and delight in, if it was me, because some of them are just absurd. There's also an exposed custom move, which is when you get exposed to something that would make you mutate. Then you roll on this table. It reminds me a lot of the Lotus Powder.
Oh, right, yeah. From Deathfrost Doom and all that stuff.
Yeah, from Deathfrost Doom. But it's more relevant to the setting, and it's a little bit more tailored to Dungeon World, so it necessarily works a little better.
Right, yeah.
I'm really, really excited for Jesse and Logan to be working together on this project. I can't wait to see what else they bring out into the world.
Well, I'm looking at the notes here. What is the roaring sword of Dagon Malice?
So I mentioned that this is a world where there are things that you and I might recognize, but somebody from a fantasy world who would never know, wouldn't get it. So here's one of those. The roaring sword of Dagon Malice. When you pull the cord and press the jewel in its handle, this strange, loud sword tears through enemies with a gruesome chain that spins around the blade. It becomes useless if you fail to let it drink the blood of machines. It's a fucking chainsaw.
It's a chainsaw. I love it. That's clever. I like that. Yeah, that's good.
It's pretty delightful.
Yeah, so. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it sounds like a fun setup. I can't wait to take a look at it.
Yeah, it's great. I can't wait to see what happens in the future with these two working together. It's only going to get...
It's on drive-thru, like
on drive-thru, pay what you want.
Pay what you want. Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, so listeners, go download that.
Yeah,
Jesus
download
Christ.
it.
There's literally no reason not to. You should also give up a few bucks.
You should definitely contribute because this is quality stuff. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be.
I want to talk about the thief moves, trap expert, and tricks of the trade. For tricks of the trade, I specifically want to talk about the trap disarming portion of it. So basically, we're talking about traps.
Traps in Dungeon World.
Traps. So I'm not going to read the text. I was going to read the text, but I'm not going to because anybody who's familiar with Dungeon World should know these moves. I want to talk about what are some of the big problems that particularly newer GMs often encounter when they're dealing with the trap expert move and the natural follow-up, the trap disarming portion of tricks of the trade. And then I want to talk about some of the ways that I have addressed those problems in my games, and then a few sort of some kind of different ways of looking at those moves and looking at traps and kind of showing how that these moves and the traps that they are kind of interrogating can be more than just simple mechanical, door or chest traps or whatever, right? One of the biggest issues that I have seen with this move, particularly when you have a new group of players or GMs who don't have a lot of experience with this system yet, and they want to run it a little closer to say D&D in terms of the beats and the pacing of it, is that they will call for the roll too often. Okay, so when I first started running Dungeon World, if the thief character was paying attention for traps, I made them roll every time the party turned a corner and headed down a new stretch of passageway, and for every single door, chest, and cabinet. Right?
It's really It's really classic D&D style.
Yeah, exactly. And I made them roll for every one of it. And then when you combine that with the follow-up disarm traps, if traps were found, it just became a real slog. Like there were just tons of rolls going on. And then like in Dungeon World, like missed rolls can go in so many wild different directions that you just ended up with, it was just kind of a slog. And it got to the point where like the players didn't even want to check for traps anymore because it became so onerous, right? Like it was just kind of slowing things down. And so now this was a long time ago, mind you. I haven't done that in years, but it's a thing though, right? It's an easy trap to fall into. Now, I want to mention that I don't think this is necessarily wrong per the text of the move, okay? I think that doing it that way is perfectly fine in the rules of the game, but it's not necessarily going to give you the best results in terms of pacing, right? And so that's what we're trying to avoid here, is like getting bogged down in trap rolls. So the way that I avoid this problem is I make Trap Expert count for a much larger area. So for passageways, I let the roll count for every stretch of passageway not blocked by a door, basically. So for example, if you have a T-shaped passageway that you can traverse entirely without opening a door, I let the roll count for that entire passageway, right? As far as like searching for traps. As far as the doors go, I let the roll count for like all of those doors, right? So like whatever doors there are in that passageway, I let the Trap Expert roll count for all of them. We assume that the thief is looking at all of the doors, right? And checking them, looking for different things. I'll caveat that by saying that if there are two doors that have like very fundamentally different traps, like one has a mechanical blade trap and the other one has like a magical rune trap that explodes, fire or something, I might have them do a different roll at that point because it's kind of a different sort of, I don't know, it's just kind of a different sort of like fictional positioning, I guess. But otherwise, I try to let the roll count for like as much of the dungeon as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think you just need to be careful there. Like, something you want to avoid is, if you do have really ornate traps, probably make it count like per like area or that trap might be, but you need to very, very carefully convey that information to the party that like, yes, you have checked here, but not there. Or
right.
Or
yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a sort of play it by ear thing, right? I mean, one thing that kind of happens when you start to think about traps in this way is that you also start to plan your dungeons in a way to where there just aren't that many traps, right? Like you kind of go for like the one big cool trap in the area and that's the trap, right? As opposed to trapping the door to go into the room, the chest in the room, the window, right? Like instead of trapping all of that, you kind of come up with like the one really cool trap, right? That you want to be the sort of set piece or the big encounter of that room, right? So that's approaching it from the other side, but like I do think that like there's such a thing as too many traps, right? So
especially if you don't have a thief.
Yeah, exactly. And so just so on the one hand, give the players as much information as possible within reason, right? When they do get one of these rolls triggered. On the other hand, maybe think about how to make your dungeons have like big, interesting traps, but just not as many, right? So like there's kind of two ways of going about that, I guess. There's two different ways of kind of looking at this, like being bogged down by traps problem. Yeah. So I think that's my main thing. Same thing for rooms. Like when the characters go into a room, as the GM, I can put a trap on the chest in the room. I can put a trap on the desk. I can put a trap, that pops down from the ceiling. I can do all that. But I feel like in the movie version of our dungeon, that'd be really stupid, right? Like in the movie version of this dungeon, they would not have these three different traps in the same space. In the movie version, there would be one trap, right? There would be the one thing the party has to get past. And so straight away, I would just kind of design the dungeon that way. Or I would, if I was going to have a trapped room, I would kind of have it be like that. Not like a bunch of little nested traps, but just like one kind of cool thing. And then when the players do their search, I let them search the whole thing, right? Like I let them search, like basically if they have time, like if they're not pressed for time, I let them just search. We assume they're looking at everything very carefully and then let them roll and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, not everything is Indiana Jones going through a temple.
Right. Yeah. 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 Real simple thing. It's, there's not some huge, deep conversation here. It's not a super deep move, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because I have seen that. I've watched some APs, for example, of Dungeon World, and I see GMs doing this, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is so boring. We don't need to do Trap Expert every time, like every, like every 20 feet or whatever. Like it's not necessary.
So what do you do with the player character who is coming to this from D&D and is expecting that? So when it comes to his turn to narrate what his character is doing, when the GM asks, "What are you doing, you thief over there?" and he's just keeps narrating, he's checking for traps.
Like if he's just focused on that one thing or whatever, on the chest.
Well, like every time you come around to him, he's checking another door or something, and you're like, "There's no traps." Like, is that what you do? I guess.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, this goes back to what I think is a sort of more sort of fundamental question about Dungeon World, right? It's the same thing about like the brand new player who always swings their sword at one goblin, right? Because that's the way you do it in D&D, right? You attack one goblin at a time. But in Dungeon World, we don't attack one goblin at a time. We describe, doing a whirling dervish of blades to like hit all 5 goblins or whatever, right? Like we describe, jumping off the parapet, stabbing the orc, kicking the ogre, doing something else to the goblin, right? Like we that's how we narrate things. So that is the same. It's the same thing, right? Like you must teach your players that. You have to teach your brand new from D&D players that, right? Like because they will do that. They will just strike the one goblin because they think that's what they're allowed to do. Once you start teaching them about like abstraction, fictional positioning, cinematic play, the trap thing comes into that, right? Right? Like I ask the player, give me the scene of what you're doing. Like if they say, okay, I'm going to check for traps on that door, I might say, that's great. Can we just say you're doing that on everything? Like show me what that looks like. And then I have them do a little bit of fiction, do a little bit of narration, and boom, then we do the roll, right? So you just show them, right? Like you don't have to be purely responsive to, yes or no binary whenever this player says they're doing something, right? Like you can kind of push back against them, bring it back to the conversation and say, okay, well, can we kind of pull that apart a little bit? Can we abstract that a little bit, or can we kind of show that whole scene rather than this one little part of the scene, right?
Yeah, that makes good sense to me. I see here on the notes that you have some ideas about traps and different kinds of traps, and maybe things that people hadn't traditionally thought of as traps.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certain these are not like amazingly original or anything, but they're just things worth keeping in mind. There are lots of different types of traps apart from just simple mechanical traps, right? As far as like non-mechanical traps go, one of my favorites are like arcane traps that are like glowing runes, or doors that have like very carefully etched little magical words that like require a careful eye to see, right? And the trap is like, some spell or whatever goes off. That's pretty common stuff as far as dungeon crawling goes. But what I love about it is when they do the tricks of the trade part of the transaction, when they go to disarm it, I love giving the thief player a chance to show their thief in action, right? Like what does it mean to disarm a magical trap, right? I think that's a super interesting question, and it's something I like to spend some time on. Like if they say, oh, well, if I say, okay, well, there's like a very, very small magical rune carved above the threshold of the door. What does it do? Well, if you go through the door, it's going to polymorph you into something. And then if they want to disarm it, I don't let them just say, well, I disarmed that, right? Like I want to hear them. I want them to tell me like what it looks like to disarm a trap like that, right? Maybe they like etch, like a cross mark or whatever that fucks it up, or maybe they smear something on it so it has no power, whatever. I'm open to anything. I just want to hear like what their ideas are. And because, when we're talking about giving being fans of the player characters, that's part of that, right? Like showing them do these, or giving them a chance to do these little like small technical tasks, like giving them a chance to illustrate that on screen is great.
Yeah.
Unusual traps or puzzle-like traps. I love stuff like that. I once had a room where there were 2 golems in the room that were powered by the light coming from this brazier hanging from the ceiling. As the player characters entered, I described the brazier and some other things. The golems were there. The thief went about there searching, and I was like, hey, look, those golems are going to activate if you go any further, And then they get to the third question. Well, what else is hidden here? That might be when I say, oh, well, the brazier is, it's a weird color, so it might be connected to this or whatever, right? Like, it just kind of like, it's a great opportunity to show like the way the move works, right? So they come in. Is there a trap here? And if so, what activates it? There is a trap here. There's a couple of golems, and they're going to come alive if you step any further. What does the trap do when activated? Well, the golems come alive, and they're going to attack you until you step back through the threshold of the door. What here is not what it appears to be, or what else is hidden here? Oh, there's a brazier right above that is glowing a fire that is the same color as the gem in the golem's forehead, right? Like, that to me is a fun way of kind of using the move to sort of interrogate the trap of a room or whatever, right? It's sort of puzzle-like trap. There are traps that are not per se traps, which is to say they were not like laid by someone to be a trap, or there are traps that are like part of the natural environment, right? I think a trap could be walking up a particular hill that causes a rock slide, the presence of quicksand in an area, the presence of predators lying in ambush is a trap. Maybe your characters are in a crowded market and there are a number of people who are watching them and who are going to like ambush them or try to assassinate them. To me, that's a trap as well. And what I love about traps like that is suddenly Trap Expert and Tricks of the Trade become less about a sort of like mechanical skill the thief has and more about the thief as a careful operator, a highly competent infiltrator of situations. Does that make sense? Like it's not just that they're like, they have like a mechanical skill. It's that they are just trained to be very aware, right? And focusing on all dangers. And so I just kind of like that too.
Gotcha. And so you just kind of let their fictional positioning of getting close to a Discern Realities roll trigger this other roll instead. Like you just let them know, like maybe you want to roll that move instead, or
no, like okay, so like let's say it's a circumstance where there's like a rock slide that could happen, right? They are searching around, or they're like, I'm kind of checking, I'm checking for like dangers or whatever as we go up the hill, right? And so maybe that triggers Discern Realities or whatever, and then I tell them, hey, it looks like there's like a rock slide here. Like if you go a little, if you kind of if you go too high or whatever, you're going to trigger this rock slide down on top of you or whatever, right? And I've had thieves be like, hey, that sounds like a trap. Do you think Tricks of the Trade would be like appropriate to disarming it, right? It's a trap in the sense that it's a natural trap, right? It's not a trap in the sense that someone put it there to do it, but if they can justify in the fiction them being able to quote unquote disarm that rock slide, I'm into it, right?
I can't say that I've seen that happen in play, but I could definitely see that now that it's more on my brain. I could see teeing up a situation where a thief player might consider that an option, and I like that. I like that as an alternative way to use the move. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is what here is useful or valuable to me.
Listeners, we are doing a brand new contest. We haven't done a contest in a long time, and we're feeling the itch of a contest. At least David was, and I agreed. So,
I want to see more content from you people.
Okay, so here's the contest. Background. During Gauntlet Con, which I mentioned at the top of the show, we had a writing contest called Keepers of the Gauntlet. Keepers of the Gauntlet is connected to our Patreon. All brand new Patreon supporters of the Gauntlet get a Keeper of the Gauntlet title. For example, David is the Keeper of the 6 Questions, right? I have no Keeper title, incidentally. But what's another Keeper title? Rich Rogers is Keeper of the Fathomless Well.
Dan is Keeper of the Inappropriate Fascination or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Some of the Keeper titles are very evocative. They're very fantasy, right? They're lots of fun things. So anyway, we had this writing contest where we asked people to write an adventure inspired by one of the Keeper titles. It could be a Dungeon World adventure starter, or it could be an OSR scenario. And we got lots of entries. It was really cool. What we want to do for this contest is basically just extend that a little bit, except narrow the focus. So what we want you to do for this contest is we want you to create a magic item, a custom move, or a monster inspired by one of the Keepers of the Gauntlet titles. So we'll have a link to the full list. There's about 350 of them. You can just pick one, and if it inspires a magic item, write a magic item. If you can think of a cool custom move, write a custom move. If you want to do a monster, and some of them have a monstrous quality, make a monster. You can enter as many times as you wish. There is no limit on the number of entries that you submit. The only limit is that for each entry, they can only be 250 words. That is the max. That's actually a lot, so it's not.
It's quite a few words.
It's not much of a limit, yeah. As we receive the entries during the contest, we will read 2 to 3 of them on each new episode of Discern Realities. The winner of the contest will get $25 plus be invited to co-host an episode of the show with us. Up to 2 runners-up will also receive $25. So $25 contest for a magic item, custom move, monster. You can send your entries to gauntletpodcast@gmail.com, or you can post the text of your entry into one of our G+ posts for this show. I like that method actually because it gives other people a chance to see what you're doing, and you can kind of inspire one another, right? Deadline for submissions is March 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. You can submit as many as you like. Keep them coming. We love it. We have some examples.
So the first example is a magic item inspired by the Keeper of the Gauntlet, Keeper of the Conch Shell Horn of Nammu. The Horn of Nammu. This horn appears to be made from a large pink and silver conch shell. When you are facing down certain death and you blow the horn, roll plus charisma. On a 10+, the power of the Ancient Sea will rescue you from danger. On a 7-9, the power of the Ancient Sea will assist you in escaping the danger, but will not rescue you outright. On a 6-, the Ancient Sea finds you wanting. The GM may hold 1 and spend it to bring down the wrath of the primordial ocean upon you.
We also have a monster here. This is a monster inspired by the Keeper title, Keeper of the 3 Wicked Kings. Our monster is one of those wicked kings, Old King Myrmiron, who is solitary, devious, intelligent, and planar. He has jellyfish claws that do D10 damage, 16 hit points, 0 armor. Old King Myrmiron was a Triton king from the ancient past, a schemer who consorted with dark gods imprisoned in the deepest parts of the ocean. His people eventually grew weary of his heretical wickedness and beheaded him. But like many ancient kings, his spirit is bound to the physical world and can never truly be destroyed, only contained. Now a vengeful revenant, he occasionally gathers enough strength to be a menace to the peaceful people of the world, and great heroes must step forward to subdue and imprison him anew. Old King Myrmiron appears as a headless Triton wearing long kelp robes festooned with pearls. He has a pair of large jellyfish on his claw-like hands. His favorite tactic in combat is to transport his enemies to a small undersea pocket dimension that resembles his coral throne room from the days of old. Though victims can swim to the surface of this tiny ocean, which leads to wherever he was originally encountered, it allows him to summon dangerous sea creatures to aid him in battle, which often appear by wriggling out of the gaping hole between his shoulders. His instinct is to escape his prison. His other moves, summon sharks and eels, paralyze foe, create an oceanic pocket dimension.
Nice.
So those are a couple of examples. Send us your magic item, custom move, or monsters inspired by one of the Keepers of the Gauntlet titles. We'll have all the appropriate links on the website.
Awesome. Let's move on to our next segment.
This episode of Discern Realities is being sponsored by Scablands Press. Listeners, I am currently holding in my hand the hardcover edition of Dust, Fog, and Glowing Embers, and it looks great. The art by Dirk Leichty is really stunning, and Ollie Jeffrey's layout is both crisp and luscious. What is Dust, Fog, and Glowing Embers? It's a role-playing game by Slade Stoller. This is from the first page of the book. What if all of the antiquated systems that were supplanted by science were the winners instead? That is, what if science lost? For example, what if alchemy rose to prominence instead of chemistry? What if numerology were the main branch of mathematics? What if the four humors underpinned our understanding of human behavior rather than psychology? What if the reading of goat entrails were the most accurate method of weather prediction? In Dust, Fog, and Glowing Embers, you enter a world at the cusp of the industrial age. You embody characters that have to face a world in which all kinds of strange physical laws apply. Therefore, this is a science fiction game, although it is set in a version of the past. Dust, Fog, and Glowing Embers is currently only available for Kickstarter backers, but should get a wide release sometime in December. Just check the Scablands website or DriveThruRPG. And thanks to Slade and Scablands for sponsoring the show.
Our next segment is What is About to Happen. Previously, in our adventure with Saint Evelyn the White, we saw her in the village of Felbit, where a crowd had been tormenting or doing some bizarre kind of execution on this creature, this thing that was referred to as one of the Stitched. And you had just gotten to high ground and made a speech that compelled the people to deliver it unto you. And the way I interpreted that is they all dispersed, looking almost ashamed of what they had been doing. And when they did so, the creature freed itself from its cage and began to drag itself over to you. Now, when it freed itself from the cage, though, it left half of its body behind. It had been destroyed by the wire and the glass, so that it was no longer whole. And it has black crow feathers lining the top of its head and shoulders. Its left arm is white fur, and its right arm and the rest of its torso is a mottled black and gray short hair, almost like a hyena's hair. And no blood is coming from the wound in its torso where its legs used to be as it drags itself closer to you.
Yeah, that's a question I had. Is it just dragging its viscera along the cobblestones?
Yeah, there's just, it is, but there's no, blood coming out.
Got it. It has strange organs.
Yeah. It's kind of unclear. Are you trying to get a closer look at it?
I am. I think as this approaches, as it's crawling toward me, I'm not even noticing that the crowd is kind of falling away. I don't know if Venka is still there. I don't know if the monk in the sort of rough spun robe is there. I'm just really focused on this creature, this strange creature, which again, I'll remind you, I've seen one before, right, when I was a kid.
Right.
I'm curious now, though. I mean, I'm mostly just studying it really closely to see what its intentions are. What is it about to do? That's what I'm trying to discern, you might say.
Go ahead and roll Discern Realities.
I got an 11.
Awesome. 3 questions.
What here is not what it appears to be?
As you look at it crawling towards you, you notice that, bizarrely, there is no blood, but you can see that there are faint white threads, very thin threads hanging from where its legs used to be.
What is about to happen?
In interpreting that as what its intentions are, because that seemed to be what you were really driving at.
I just want to know if it's going to attack me.
It's not looking threatening. It looks kind of confused, but it seems to, it has intelligence in its eyes, and it seems to recognize that you are the one who stopped it from getting destroyed. So it just seems to be coming closer to address you.
My final question is, who's really in control here? And what I'm really interested in is finding out, if possible, is it like animated by some malevolent force? Is it a creature of evil? That sort of thing, right? Like, who's really in control of this creature's actions?
It seems to be autonomous. It doesn't seem to be driven by dark forces or anything like that. You don't
I'm not getting a bad juju feeling or anything like that. Right?
No, like, you're not like feeling like evil radiating from it or anything like you might have experienced in your faith. Have you experienced that kind of thing before?
It gets muddied, right? I mean, right now the lands are war-torn. Felbit is having its particular troubles right now with these creatures, it sounds like, but wars are just a regular part of the landscape at this point, right? I mean, everywhere you go, when you just see pain and suffering and destruction, and when you have made it your holy mission to alleviate the pain and suffering of people by killing them, you begin to have a difficult time perceiving good and evil, right? It gets to be a bit tricky. But true evil has a certain underlying throbbing sense of anger and hatred that doesn't attend much of this, right? Like, when I see people suffering in war, you can kind of peel back and see like different, economic reasons or religious reasons or other tribal things that sort of push people to do terrible things. But really true evil is just utterly malignant and has no reason for being other than just being evil. And you can usually pick up on that.
You don't sense any of that coming from this creature.
That's good. It's interesting.
And it's dragging itself closer to you, and it seems to be, its mouth is moving, but it's faint. It's faint, like it doesn't have much strength to put behind its words, so it's just trying to get closer, dragging itself with its white arm and its gray and black arm, until it gets close enough that you can hear it whispering up to you.
I will crouch down to hear what it has to say.
What business have you with me?
And I will stand up. And I will look the creature square in the eye and say, "What business do you and your kind have with the people of Felbit and the people of these lands?"
And he flops himself over onto his back and stares up at you and opens his eyes. One of the eyes is blue and one of the eyes is green. And he seems to be kind of gasping for air to try and respond. He doesn't seem to be in pain. It just seems to be difficult.
I will try to free him from whatever is constraining him right now, whether it be some kind of injury, whatever it is. I will try to call upon the saints to alleviate that.
So, what's the realm that is controlled?
The saints that I follow, I practice a particular style of worship that's all about like freeing people, like freeing you from your bonds, right?
Right.
And so I want to free this creature from whatever prevents it from speaking to me right now, if that makes sense.
Okay. So it's the physical damage to its body that is preventing it from being able to speak freely.
I view it as a sort of like releasing them from the bondage of injury and pain, right?
All right.
And so I would do that. I would say a little prayer, and that's the blessing I choose to manipulate the realm that my deity controls. And I roll plus wisdom. I got a 5.
You begin to pray over the creature, and those white threads begin weaving back into it and look like they are repairing the damage that is a part of it. Are you crouched over the creature and praying?
I am, and I'm doing that thing where I wrap that string around my finger really tightly, or I already have it wound around my finger really tightly, and I slowly like undo it as a sort of like physical expression of my belief, right?
Mm. And as you're doing that and you're focusing and it's working, the weaving is coming together, and the creature kind of tilts its head up to look at you. And I am Kukrak. I can tell you what you want to know. And then there's just a bludgeoning, crunching noise, and its viscera from its head sprays over you as the priest, who was standing by and watching, comes up and drives his staff through the back of the creature's head.
God damn it.
And we'll end it there. That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Discern Realities is a production of The Gauntlet. We can be found on our community page on G+. Just go to the community section of G+, and search for The Gauntlet. You will find us there. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. On that website, you can find links to all of our other shows, including the excellent Plus One Forward, our brand new show, Fear of a Black Dragon, our AP shows, Pocket Size Play and Comic Strip AP, and, of course, main Gauntlet podcast. We are on Twitter at GauntletRPG, and if you'd like to support us financially, you can go to patreon.com/Gauntlet.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show.